Hola, buenas noches. Hello, everybody, from beautiful Mexico City. I know I could be anywhere in the world, but that is where I am. How are y'all doing tonight? It is a Wednesday. I think it is 8 p.m. Eastern on the East Coast of the US. This week, coming to you live at 8 p.m. Next week, I do believe it will be 7 p.m. Um, if you're here watching this live, there should be a poll over there for you to take. For those of you who are planning to go abroad, are you expecting, or is your plan to rent or to buy? And I am trying to see the poll. Can I see it? Okay. All right. So this will be interesting to see how this poll turns out. Right now, the renters are massively ahead. More than 70% of you say that your plan is to rent, uh, full stop, with about 22% of you thinking about renting first, but eventually the plan is to buy. Just a handful of you, it's your plan to buy when you brought. That's really, really interesting. Um, so I guess I should get going and get this show on the road. Um, a big part of the American dream is owning a home. But how does that translate when you move abroad? I've been seeing a lot of this conversation lately in the various move abroad, expat, immigrant spaces that I'm in. And I thought I would take tonight to offer my 2 cents as someone who has lived abroad for the last 7 years in 4 different countries. Um, if you are new here, let me introduce myself. I am Adelia Aborashade, although I am probably more widely known as Picky Girl Travels the World on the internet. I help Black women live their dreams, whether that is through attending Reclaim the Retreat so that they can reclaim their happiness, their peace, their joy, or teaching them how to invest, or helping them plan a move abroad. That's what I do. And I want you to live your best life. So, welcome. So glad you found our little spot on the internet. Welcome to the Picky Girl Nation. We are glad you are here. You'll definitely want to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, because according to the folks in the comments, there's a lot of useful information on this channel. So, um, I see, let me go back so I can look at the poll results. Okay, so we've got a few more people who their plan is to rent first and then buy. But still, overwhelmingly, most of you who are here tonight, your plan is to rent. And so I would love to hear your reasoning, whether you are renting, the plan is to rent, whether the plan is to rent then buy, or whether the plan is to buy. I would love for you to share in the comments why, what you're thinking, what your reasoning. Um, we're everything we do on this channel is about helping somebody along in their journey. So I'm sure it would be helpful to hear from other folks, like what they're thinking and what their thought process is. Um, so yeah, drop that in the chat if you would. What is this? I cannot. I don't have my glasses on. Ishul Charon. I'm sorry. I can't see those letters. I'm done with the American dream. So many people can't afford to buy homes in America anyway. Um, that is definitely how a lot of people feel. Um, I was reflecting on the fact that I bought my very first house in I was 22 years old. I wasn't even I think I was turning 22. It was the same month that I turned 22. And I think if you talk to 22-year-olds now, that is like almost not even in the realm of possibility for them. Um, and my oldest daughter bought her house. I mean, she bought it from her father, but she bought her first house when she was 25. So, you know, I know that that's a oddity because there are a lot of folks, especially the millennials, a lot of them owning a home has just it's been a dream and they don't see it as a reality. Okay. So Big Sis Dula is thinking rent, buy several acres of land, and then build. Okay. Okay. Um, Jam's kid, I've been wrestling with this question for the US and abroad. Um, Jessica thinks that real estate is always a great investment. It definitely can be. Um, Ingrid owned previously. I prefer to stay mobile when move when I want. So I guess that's a vote for renting. Um, okay, Kim. My understanding is that in Ecuador, it is easier to buy than to sell. Besides, if there is a change in government and I need to get out, speed is essential. So that definitely sounds like a vote for renting. Monica, owning feels more secure to me. But if I get there and learn different, I'll just rent. I think that's a good attitude to have. That's one of the things I've noticed about this particular topic is people, particularly the folks who plan to buy, are kind of like, I am buying and that is that. And I don't want to hear anything else about it. But I think it is important, as with most things in life, to kind of, you know, be open to the possibilities. Simi. I'd like to have a home base I could rent out while bopping around. I thought about subletting, but more and more owners don't allow it. Because that's what I was going to say. I understand the desire to want a home base as someone who I am not a bopper at heart. This is what I've discovered. I am a trip taker, but I do like to be able to come back home somewhere. And so I definitely get the desire to have a home base. And that home base can be purchased, it can be rented. But like you said, if the plan is to then sublet it, kind of to offset the expense of paying rent when you aren't there, that, is definitely going to depend on your landlord. Alicia says, I really want to love home ownership because it could be a lot more cost effective abroad, but there are so many upkeep costs. It's stressful. It's a hedge against inflation. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Okay. All right. Cherie owns in the US. Diva Miami. I want the flexibility of renting so you can bop around and move. Okay. All right. Slow travel equals renting for me. Okay. Um, I'm laughing at you, Monica. I'm a Cancer. I need my home shell. You sound like another Cancer in my life. Sounds exactly like that. All right. Cherie says, I think we've been told in the past that renting leaves money on the table, but I'm thinking it really depends on the market. So let's get into it because those of us who are coming from a US mindset and a US background, that is very much we've home ownership has been pushed as the preferable option, the option that makes most sense from a financial standpoint, and all of that. And very much an integral part of the American dream. Um, but I want to start there. Um, when people I think we can all agree that when we think about the American dream, what it means to like make it in America, owning your own home is a integral part of that. We often get told it is an investment, it is, a hedge against inflation, all of those things. Are those things all true? Maybe. Sometimes. Um, I will tell you that, and I've experienced this backlash personally, when you get into spaces where people are talking about this and you like poo-poo home ownership, the pro own a house folks, they get in their feelings. Um, I remember I talked about this on here once before. I remember posting an article I had seen, I think it was in the Austin Statesman, about this was a few years ago, about how the cost of renting an apartment had surpassed like what the average mortgage payment was. And so no, the other way around, uh, that renting was indeed cheaper than buying. All I did was post the article and say, like, hey, if you've been somebody who, really wasn't feeling home ownership, here you go. And the backlash that I got from posting that, you would have thought I called somebody's baby ugly. Okay. Um, So, just in general in the US, very pro own a home. Like, if you're going to be a person of status, a person of value, you're going to own a home. I think for those of us who are Black Americans, there is an added layer to that because we're coming at this, we're participating in a system that was not designed for us, definitely was not designed for us to succeed. And it is through home ownership, like one of the ways we could get our foot in the door. But there have been so many things systematically trying to deny us that, redlining. And then you look at like gentrification that has happened and all of those things. So it is very hard to kind of shake that thinking when you consider moving abroad because it may just feel natural. Like, of course, that's what you do. You move to a new place, you buy a house. Think about people who move from one place in the US to another. That is often what they do. One of the first things they look for a house to buy. Um, but I don't know. Should we be taking that attitude with us internationally? I don't know. I don't know. So that's kind of what I want to talk about. Um, I'm just going back and seeing if there are comments that I need to star so we can come back to them. And there are a few in here that I do I do want to. Okay. Um So, I'm not really here to tell you, like, yes, we should take that attitude abroad or no, we shouldn't. I guess I'm more of the mindset of let's examine before we take it abroad. I think when you're making such a big life change as moving to a new country, it's a brand new place, it's a brand new life, and so you don't have to bring any of that old baggage with you. You get to decide, you get to re-examine it all. So let's talk a little bit about why you would buy when you move abroad. Um, I think the most obvious reason would be as a means to get residency. Um, in many countries, particularly in Europe, uh, a lot of their golden visa programs will give you access to residency and possibly a passport citizenship if you spend a certain amount of money on a house. Um, I've told y'all this before that generally when you're looking at countries offering residency, you either have to pay with time or you have to pay with money. As y'all know, I've shared as part of my whole country shopping process, I am not looking to pay with money, and I really don't want to pay with time. Which is part of the reason I have not found that other place that I'm gonna get residency in, and when I say pay with time, for instance, a place like Portugal, I cannot remember what the exact number is, um, they have currently in this moment, they have a golden visa program that they are probably going to discontinue. And for several, if you were to buy a home worth several 100,000 euro, I believe it was like 300,000, 350,000. If you bought property for that amount, you could get residency and you would not have to spend a significant amount of time in the country. But if you're somebody like me who does not want to spend part with that kind of money, the other way you can get residency in Portugal is proving that you have enough money to support yourself and spending somewhere between 6 to 8 months a year in the country. So you either have to pay with your time or your money. So, for a lot of people, it might make sense to, like you need some place to live. Why not buy a place in this new country and then you still kind of remain free enough to go in and out as you please? Even Mexico has a residency option that allows you to get residency through the purchase of a house, a house, apartment, whatever, here. Um, but one of the things that kind of hangs people up about in Mexico, the property you buy has to have a certain value. And people coming from the US often think, oh, I bought this property. It is now worth X number of pesos or dollars. I can use that to qualify for residency. And no, it doesn't matter what your property is worth now. It is how much was it worth when you bought it. Um, and uh, so I get it. I get it. That's obviously one way that you can kind of kill two birds with one stone. You have a place to live and you get residency, possibly a second passport. Another reason of why somebody might want to buy a place to live in another country is they may be able to get more house for their money than they can get elsewhere. We see this happen in the US all the time, especially over the last few years. Folks leaving places like California and going to places like Texas, where they can get a lot more house for the money. And so they were willing to pay significantly more, make cash offers, that kind of stuff. So we see that happen in the US. I get it. You move to another country, you kind of want to, move it up a notch. That's one way you could do it. That's an arguable reason of to why you could buy in another country. Um, but I would also ask, like, the folks who are thinking about that to think about, you know, what is the motivation? If it's not about getting residency or citizenship, and it's not about, well, my $100,000 can't buy me jack squat in my state, but if I go to this country, my $100,000 USD can buy me an estate. If it's not about that, are you simply trying to transplant your old life into a new location? Was it on last week's podcast? No, 2 weeks ago. The podcast I did with Ivana Robinson, Tea Time with Ivana, we talked about why people move abroad and whether their expectations are really in alignment with reality. And this idea that I'm going to go to a new country and not have examined, you know, why you didn't want to be in your old country. What can the new country really do for you? Like, it's very easy to fall into, okay, I'm going to just do the things I did in my old country in this new country. And I don't recommend that. Like, you really need to examine why it is you want to move abroad, why it is you're choosing that country, and not fall into the trap of simply trying to replicate your life in a new country. Okay, so that's something to think about. Um, Another reason I often hear is that, and we talked about this a little bit today, that renting is leaving money on the table. Renting is throwing money away. You want a hedge against inflation. You want to keep your housing costs reasonable. Um, you know, you need to buy, and then you don't ever have to worry about a landlord raising your rent. Um, so I hear that, but I have to really ask, is that true? Um, this often gets overlooked in this same rent versus buy conversation in the US. People think about rent as I'm paying this money for rent month after month, year after year. And in the end, I don't have anything to show for it. But if I were to buy a place, at the end, I would have that property. Well, yes, at the end of paying a mortgage, you do have a property. That is true. But I think it is misspeaking to say that by paying rent, you're throwing money away, because what you're paying for is a place to live. And it has provided you with a place to live the whole time you've been paying rent. And that's an important thing. Something else that is often missing from that conversation, and this is something I tried really hard to explain to my now 28-year-old before she bought a house, and she has learned this lesson the hard way. When you have a mortgage, people are like, I know what my housing costs are going to be each month because my mortgage is my mortgage. A landlord can raise the rent. Your rent is the maximum you will pay for housing in a month. Your mortgage is the minimum. It is the least that you will pay. And a lot of people don't think about it that way. If the furnace goes out, the refrigerator, there's a hole in the roof, a pipe leaks, uh, there's a water main that leaks under your house, you're responsible for that as the property owner. Okay. Um, Alicia's talking about that. Well, it didn't show your comment. Why is it not showing? There we go. That's the argument. The hidden cost, though, HOA, homeowners insurance, repairs, property taxes. Exactly. It is your mortgage is the least amount you can expect to pay in a month. But with your rent, that's the most you can expect to pay. Um, so this idea that by renting, you are throwing money away, and by buying, you're doing something better than people who are just paying to have a place to live, I think we need to divorce ourselves of that completely right now. Um, so I don't know, will it keep your housing costs in control? There's a lot of hidden costs, and I think when you move abroad, there's even more there are probably hidden costs you're not even considering. Uh, especially if it's a country where things like utilities don't work the same way, how you get water, is water actually piped into the property, or do you have to request a tanker to come and fill your cistern? Like, how much is that going to cost? How frequently do you have to do it? Using gas versus electricity. Like here in Mexico, electricity is subsidized until you get to a certain usage point. The subsidy goes away and electricity becomes very, very expensive. Okay. So that's just something to really think about. We often accept that idea that, oh, by having a fixed house note, um, takes care of everything. And I don't know. And that really leads into the other obvious thing here, the idea of a mortgage. Um, Mortgages are not things everywhere. A lot of places, um, mortgages are not a thing, or they're places like here in Mexico. You want to buy a property, the expectation is either you will pay the entire amount in cash. Now, think about how differently the housing market would look in the United States if people could not get mortgages to buy houses. If the only people who could buy houses were the people who had all the cash up front. Think about how different things would look. Okay. Or mortgages have become more of a thing here, but still, you're talking about double digit, like 20% interest or more. And you are talking about having to put down somewhere between 30 and 50% down. And in a lot of the spaces I'm in with people in the US, folks are struggling to get like a 20% down, which used to be kind of the standard down payment. But if you get like an FHA loan, you can get in with somewhere between 3 to 5%. Um, you know, I so if there are no mortgages, like, you really willing to come off that? Are you capable of coming off that kind of money, uh, s at one time? Okay. Alright. I'm only thinking about buying abroad if I could purchase in cash. I don't know of any place where you couldn't purchase in cash, um, but I see in some of the foreigner groups here, I see a lot of people from the US, from Canada, sort of expecting the house purchasing process to look a lot like it does there, and it doesn't. It's different here, you know? Um, so that's the thing. What else is on my list here? Oh, okay. So, 'cause I would say if you're considering buying in a country, look at first, do most people own or do most people rent? And if there is a large class of renters, you've got to do some more investigation and figure out why that is. Is it because mortgages are not available and it takes people years upon years and it takes multiple generations coming together in order to purchase property? Like, um, if there's a large class of renters. You need to fully understand why that is, what is the market doing there, what's going on. I think if you want to buy in another country, the amount of time you should put into your research and your thought process needs to be significantly more than what you would do back home because there's so many layers and levels to the process that are likely to be different than it is in the country that you come from. The majority of you who watch my videos are from the US. Um, and so, like, a kind of an example of that is we are often told, particularly those of us who are Black Americans, that owning a home is a way to create generational wealth. You know, don't sell grandma's house, that whole thing. And I'm not here to say, like, yes, uh, that's right, that's true. No, that isn't. I really just want you to think about it fully. Um, and so here's the thing, you're buying property in another country. What are the inheritance laws in that country when it comes to real estate? I'm thinking about, there are several African countries that come to mind, um, where you can't really buy the property when you would do what we would consider buying the property. Really, what you're doing is you're getting 100-year lease on the land, which for the average person's lifespan, that means I have this property for as long as I'm alive. But what happens when you die? In that country, can you even pass on your interest in that property to heirs? Is that allowed? Or is the land lease only for the person who made the purchase? So the assumption many of us from the US make is that I buy a house, I buy this land in this other country, I can pass it on to my heirs. Double check that because it is quite possible that you may not be able to, or that if you can pass it on to the heirs, do they own it in the same way that you owned it previously? Um, and speaking of heirs, if you lived in the United States and you moved to whatever country and your children don't come with you. They're adults, they're doing their thing, they're living their lives wherever, either back home or some other country. When you pass away, are your heirs going to do what it takes to take ownership of that property, to get the title transferred to their name? If it's a country that has some kind of um, like occupying requirement, like people who own property have to physically live in them X number of months, X number of years. Are your heirs willing to do those things? This is one of the reasons, as much as I love Mexico City and I consider it to be home, it is, no matter what other country I happen to end up getting residency in, Mexico City is home for me. But one of the main reasons that I will not buy property here is because at the end of my life, whenever that is, and it's time for my children to inherit it, I know they will not they are not. First of all, my kids don't even have valid passports. How are they going to administer a property in another country with a language they don't speak, laws they are unfamiliar with? I know my children. I know they won't. So why why put that money into a property that more likely than not, when I die, will either revert back to the government or what have you, or maybe squatters will take it over, because that's a whole thing here. Yeah, that's the question we need to ask is, realistically, especially when we're talking about buying property outside the US, is this thing that we intend to be a blessing, is it really going to be that? Or is it going to be a burden that they are not willing to assume, they are not capable to assume, that will then be money spent after not? Okay. Shell says this is the exact reason I won't buy. I don't want to burden my children with dealing with property abroad. Yeah. Uh, I I pointed out to my oldest child when we got my granddaughter's passport. I was like, hey, you know, something happens to me, or when something happens to me, I was like, how are you going to see two things? I was like, you don't have a passport. And she looked at me dead in my face and she was like, oh, I thought you had somebody to handle that. I do because I know my child, but she didn't know that. So that is something I want us to think about. It's we have to be very careful when we take, I don't want to say the mindset of, like we had in our old country, but there's some assumptions we make about how things work because that's how they've worked our whole life. But when we're moving to a whole nother country, it's a whole nother set of rules, a whole nother set of ideas. And we really have to examine them if we're going to make the kind of commitment property ownership would entail. Um, so will your heirs jump through the hoops necessary to keep the property? In some countries, those hoops are less intensive than in other countries. Um, so if your plan is yes, I want my children to have a diversified portfolio of real estate. There's my house or my properties in the US. I want them to have properties abroad. Maybe that should figure into your country shopping. Um, where, how people inherit property. Maybe that should be one of your criteria as you are considering where to move abroad. Hold on, y'all. I got to turn on this fan because I am. Okay. Um, we talked about, can the title even pass to them? Will they jump through the hoops? Are there tax implications? Um, Inheritance taxes, where you live in the US, the vast majority, I think, of the people who are watching this channel right now probably don't need to worry about inheritance taxes. Okay. But in other countries, there may be inheritance taxes on that would impact your heirs. And so understanding what those rules are. And also, I see this a lot. People who buy property in Mexico, like they buy it with the intention of it being an investment. Like, I'll live in it for a certain amount of time and then I will sell it. Well, in Mexico, if the capital gains that you make because your property has increased in value, if you are not a resident of Mexico and you sell property, you will have to pay, I believe it is 30% capital gains tax. So that would be something I would definitely want to make sure I had an understanding of before I bought a house in another country. Um, and, you know, is there going to be an issue versus I'm a resident versus a non-resident versus a citizen? Some countries may have rules that particular. So that's definitely something you want to look into. Um, and will the property actually appreciate? In the US, our prevailing attitude is buy property. It always goes up in value. If you were alive in 2008, 2009, 2010, you know that that is not always true. Property can increase in value and the value can also go down. So that's in the US. What has been the case in this country you're considering buying property in? Um, are people really seeing significant growth in value for the properties they've bought? Um, Again, it's good not to make any assumptions. That means really doing some homework on the market you are considering buying in and coming in with no assumptions about how things work, even if it's something like you're like, "Oh, that's just how real estate works." No, it's not. No, it's not. Okay, so we cannot go into other countries and their real estate markets with those kinds of assumptions because we're gonna get our feelings hurt. We talked about mortgage availability. Um, are there protections for homeowners? Way back when I used to teach geography, I did this thing on, like why certain countries were more successful than others. And one of the biggest predictors of what we and we're saying success in quotes here, but one of the biggest predictors of success were um, property rights. Like, is this a country where the rule of law is recognized and the rule of law can enforce property rights? And for those of us from the US, we kind of take for granted the idea that if I buy property, if I own property and something goes wrong with the deal, I have recourse. There is someone I can sue. There is, something like that. That is not true in every country in the world. Um, if you get a house built and it turns out that the builder did not follow the code for the area, you probably either have grounds to make an insurance claim, to sue, or something like that. That may not be the case in the country that you are considering. So that would be something else I'd want to know about. Uh, if before I bought property, before I bought any kind of real estate in another country, uh, what is my recourse if it turns out, they skimmed on what the code was? We were having a conversation today about the earthquake on September 19th, 2017, because I was here in Mexico City and talked about which areas of the city saw damage and that some of those places where the buildings either collapsed or were declared uninhabitable were relatively new buildings that were built after the construction codes were made stricter. Turns out the developers cut corners. Like, what would be your recourse in that situation? Oh no, that's being here and experiencing that was something else that gave me pause about buying here in the city in this country. Um, this is another thing. Building upkeep. In a place like Mexico City, there are a mix of housing options. There are individual houses similar to kind of what we are used to in the United States. There are things that are very similar to kind of like townhomes, where they are houses next to each other that are attached. And then the vast majority of the people here in the city live in apartment buildings. Some of them are high rises, like Rashida Dow lives in a high rise. Some of them are very low rise because there are parts of the city where you cannot build high rises due to the earthquakes and that sort of thing. Like the building I live in only has 7 floors. There's some buildings that only have three. There's a whole variety. But what I learned very quickly is that when you buy an apartment here, really what you're doing is entering in a relationship with all the other property owners in the building. I think people get really excited. They're like, I'm going to buy this condo on the beach. And a lot of us think about like homeowners associations like they work in the United States. Um, in Mexico, it's not quite the same thing. So I have had friends who the people in their building were not paying the maintenance fee. It's kind of like homeowners association dues, but less formal than that. And so Uh, when the elevator broke, they couldn't get it repaired. My friend lived on like the 10th or 11th floor in a 14 or 15-story building. And because people were not willing to pay their maintenance fee, they didn't have elevator. Or and they had to like fire the security guard company. I know somebody else who there was big drama in their building because the age of their building, everybody is not billed for gas individually. The All of the use for the entire building comes on one bill, and everybody has to pay their share. Well, there were some folks who were like, such and such an apartment too, they're running a business out of there and they're using more gas and they should pay more. I'm not paying anything. So understanding that if you buy this apartment, you are putting yourself at the whim of the other owners in the building. I don't know how to protect yourself against that, so that's one of the reasons I didn't buy here. So again, we have to make sure we ask those questions and understand those things um, when we are considering buying abroad. Um, because you just never know. You never know. And had I showed up here, like almost I did, when I first moved here, I was having a hard time finding an apartment. That's because I didn't realize everybody has a hard time finding an apartment in this city. And it was going into 2 months, and I was like, you know what? I should probably just buy something. And this was before I had really spent enough time living in a building to understand how the dynamics could go bad. And this was also before the first earthquake. And it had not ever occurred to me that one of the things I would need to do if I bought a property in this city would be to have a structural engineer look at the building where I want to buy, look at the apartment. Like, that had never crossed my mind. I'm from Texas. We don't have earthquakes. So, I think if you're going to buy abroad, you really need to talk to other people who have bought, and not just about the transaction of like, okay, do I need a realtor? Do I need a lawyer? Do I need a notary? Not just about that, but really about what does it mean when you buy? What are some of your responsibilities as an owner of this property? What are some things that were different than what you did back in the States? Like, really? And so I think that takes time. So if you're thinking like, I sell my house in the US, I'm gonna roll that money into this other apartment that I visited a couple of times, I would caution you against that. I would say I would spend some significant time really studying that particular market before I bought. And that's not even to talk about, um, somebody said it earlier. I think they were talking about Ecuador, about it being easier to buy than it is to sell. That's something else in that tiny moment of time when I was considering buying an apartment here, I had not thought of. I was working on the assumption that, like, buying and selling worked like it did in the United States. It does not. At least here it doesn't. Um, what I start to notice, and those of you who watch Rashida Dow's channel, you've heard her talk about this. Her landlord wanted to sell her apartment, and so was like, you've got to be open to letting people come to see it. That apartment has been on the market for a couple of years. That's very common here in Mexico City. Buying is a lot easier than selling. Most and that is so contrary to what our experience is in the US. I watch a lot of the I watch the HGTV shows, but on YouTube, where they've cut out all of the fluff and you get like the meat of the episode. That's the way to do it. And I love the people on unsellable houses. And they were talking about like, oh, the house was on the market for 45 days. And in the US, that's a long time, especially the last couple of years with the craziness in the housing market. If you didn't sell the house the day it was listed, it was like, oh, do we need to bring down the price? And here, the expectation is your house will probably be on the market for 2 to 3, maybe 4 years. And so if that's what you have to look forward to. So let's say you found this place, you think it's great. You're like, I want to live here. I'm gonna buy a house. And then it turns out it's really noisy there and you don't like it and you want to leave. Guess what? It's going to take you a couple of years to get your money back out of that deal. I've seen this quite a few times. I'm in some of the larger foreigner groups, where people will say, we're moving back to Canada or we're moving such and such place. We have this custom built home that we are selling. And a lot of times, folks need that money out of the house before they can move. Well, I guess they should have started planning 3 years before because that's probably, excuse me, that's probably how long it's going to take them to get their money back. So that's wild. Um, I'm glad you asked this question, Monica. Again, it goes back to rule of law. In a lot of places, deeds and titles to property do not work the same as they do in the US. Like if you've ever bought a house in the US, you have to pay for a title policy. And I know folks be trying to cut corners. My daughter tried to do this. She was like, "Oh, do I have to pay for that?" And I was like, "No, that's for your protection. Because if there had been a mistake in recording the title, there had been a lien that maybe somebody didn't find, that insurance policy will pay you." Um, and that, again, rule of law, record keeping, if it's a country that has a serious squatters' rights situation, and Mexico is one of those places, that's that's a big thing that happens here a lot. People will purchase ejido land, which is sort of like communally owned land, and so somebody will sell them this land, except they don't have clear title to the land because clear title to that land does not exist. So a big part of buying property here is making sure that the person who is selling it to you really does own it. They do not owe any taxes, although taxes, because unlike the US, here in Mexico, taxes don't accrue. First of all, taxes on property are a lot lower and they don't accrue the kind of penalties. Like if you don't pay your taxes here for 20 years, they're not going to seize your property. But before you can sell it, somebody's got to pay those taxes. And if you don't get a notario that knows what they're doing, you, the purchaser, may have to pay those back taxes. So that is something important to think about, um, thank y'all, before, before you do that, before you make that jump. Um, so yeah, so that's why to buy, thinking about things you should consider with buying. Let's talk a little bit about renting. Um, I see what I see a lot is somebody says, I am thinking about moving to this country and I want to buy a house for this amount. What cities do y'all know that have houses where I could get that? And over, people will reply to those posts. You should really rent in an area you like for at least a year. And people be ignoring that advice. And I would tell you, I endorse that advice. And I think ignoring that advice, you do so at your own peril. Especially those of us who are leaving our lives in the US and embarking on something completely new, different. We're trying to figure out, like, what is the dream? What is it I want? Just like when you quit a job, it takes time to sort of decompress, distance yourself, examine what you want. I would say you need to do the same thing when it comes to real estate. Don't jump from one house into another. Spend some time. You may think, I want to live near the beach. And then you get there and you underestimated how hot it is, the mosquitoes, the iguanas, the geckos in the house, the cockroaches, the humidity. And then you're like, you know what? Living next a beach adjacent isn't really for me. If you've rented, that's an easy fix. If you've bought there, that may not be such an easy fix. So, renting in a place that you like for at least a year, highly, highly recommend it. Um, we've talked a lot about how the way real estate markets worked in your home country may not be the way that they work in this new place. That is also true when it comes to renting. In the US, you rent an apartment, it is going to come with a stove, it'll probably come with a dishwasher, it's probably going to come with a refrigerator. You rent an apartment here, you rent an apartment in some places in Europe, the kitchen is just a room. There is nothing in it. You are expected to buy cabinets. You are expected to come up with the appliances. I've talked about this before on the videos I did specifically about apartment hunting here in Mexico City, that if it doesn't say integrated kitchen, do not assume that there is a kitchen. And even in apartments like my building, I think this building was built in 2016 and I moved in 2020. Even in my building where, yes, there are cabinets, I have a stove, refrigerators are not standard when renting an apartment. So that was a given that I need to buy a refrigerator. If you find an apartment here that includes a refrigerator, that's usually considered like a semi-furnished apartment. So again, we can't make the assumption that the same rules worked this at home work here. Um, Another thing that has been different, uh, like I didn't learn about until I got here is, what was I gonna say? Because I forgot the thought. It came to me and I forgot it. Um, we talked about there not being kitchens. Ah, oh, how you rent an apartment. At least in Texas, individual ownership of apartments outside of like condos isn't really a thing. I think the folks who are on the East Coast, see, Tracy is looking for an apartment and we have to buy a refrigerator. Yeah. Uh this is true, Kim. Sometimes they don't even have light fixtures. Uh but and maybe people on the East Coast in the US are more used to there being a building full of apartments and each apartment is owned individually, or there is an owner for the building. That is not super common here. So people who are expecting to like go into a leasing office and say, I want to move in on October 1st. What units will you have available there? That does not really exist here. And so how you have to look for an apartment is a very different experience than what I had to do in the US. So that's something else to consider. It's not just buying looks different other places, renting looks different as well. We talked about by renting, and I think there were several of you who said this, that your plan was to rent because it gave you more flexibility. Did I not? Maybe I didn't mark those comments, but I saw them. I saw them, that it gives you the kind of flexibility. Like, you don't like the place, you decide, "Oh, you know what? I thought I wanted a home base, but I would prefer to bop around." Shonda, your apartment was a little different. It came with things that most apartments don't. Um, so yeah. Kimmy, you take your fridge with you because you own it. It does not belong to the apartment. Same thing with the apartments where people install cabinets. When they leave, they take their cabinets with them. It's like that in a bunch of European countries too. Um, so yeah, that's something to think about. Um, so we talked about flexibility. You don't like the place. If you are renting, if after some time you figure out this is not where I want to be, I don't like speaking this language, whatever it is, renting gives you the flexibility to choose another location. Um, for a lot of people, renting might be cheaper than owning. We've talked a little bit about, like fixing things. Um, I've looked a couple of times at renting a house here in Mexico City and quickly decided that I did not want to have to deal with figuring out who was going to handle the plants outside, who was going to maintain the water tanks, who was going to schedule or get the gas delivered. Like, I didn't want to be bothered with any of that. I want my life simple. I want to pay the rent. And if something breaks, I call you. However, that might not work the same. In the US, we're very much of the mindset that, the landlord fixes everything. Um, I'm trying to think. In China, did the landlord fix things? Oh no. In some Mexican landlords, a lot of things that we would expect American landlords to take care of, they would not fix here. Um, so that's again making sure you understand and don't make the assumptions there. Um, So if you're like me and you want your life to be simple, or you're like me and here's another reason that I rent, and particularly why I rent in a small enough building where the people at the front desk know me. Where I used to live in Mexico City, I thought was a small building and didn't realize that there were hundreds of apartments. The people at security had no idea who I was or where I lived, okay? The building because I live here alone, my family is in another country. I told y'all my children don't have passports, so they can't come handle stuff for me. Um, like living in a place where there are earthquakes or what have you, I need the people at the front desk, the security guards, to know, hey, the black lady, the Morena with the pink hair. I need them to know, oh, everybody's outside from the earthquake. We haven't seen her. We haven't seen the lady from that apartment. If I was renting a house here, I don't know that I'd have that built-in person checking to see, am I here? So that's another reason that I have chosen to rent. Can you speak about the gringo rental prices? Um, Wherever you go, there is quite possibly going to be a price for locals and a price for you. Um, and I think that's something you need to figure into your planning. Um, I try to Shonda said Mexico City is high for everyone. It is. It is, y'all. I love the people who are like, "Yeah, I'm gonna move to Mexico so I can live cheaper." That's it, particularly Mexico City. That's like saying, have you ever heard anybody say, "I'm gonna move to LA. I'm going to move to New York City because things are cheaper?" No, that's stupid, right? Same thing about Mexico City. It is expensive, and uh, it is unfortunately, a kind of a given that the perception is foreigners got more cash, that we are privileged, therefore they could charge us higher prices. And that's I forgot to mention this before, but that is another thing I think we need to think about if we're considering buying. Because if you've got you've got a big chunk of cash, or you secure financing outside of your destination country. So, like, you're in the US, you get a loan for a vacation home or however you work it in the US, but you have the ability to show up in another country and pay cash. That's a privilege local folks may not have. And I think we have to be careful about buying property in a place where a lot of people can't buy property. Like, do we want to do that? Is that appropriate? Um, Me buying up that property, does that then make it so that some hardworking family that has three generations can't save enough money? That's something to explore, um, you know, as you are considering that. Um, Now, Shonda, you're gonna buy in Paris, you rent here in Mexico. Um, why the difference? Why the difference? I'm curious. I'm curious. Let's see what other questions y'all had here. Um, what about buying land abroad? Um, as somebody, I did this in the US. I bought a piece of property that I then built a custom house on. And what I learned from that process is if money is no object, process is great. If you have a specific budget that you would like to stick to, it's going to be a nightmare. I have a friend here who has bought empty, undeveloped land in several settings. There is a link to the video we did in the description of this one. And to see her at the beginning of that process and to see where she is now, she's like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever done. Um, Again, I think you have to find out what are titles like, what is the process for titling property? Does the rule of law follow there like it's supposed to? How do you develop it? Because just like in the US, you might be buying property within some kind of development where, yeah, you get to build your own thing there, but you've got to do there's certain setbacks, there's certain ways you've got to do sewer and that sort of thing. Or if it's like these people I see buying property like in Tulum, like in the jungle, and the developers like, "Ooh, live in the jungle." Yes, but there are no utilities on that property. So you, as the owner of the property, will probably have to pay to bring those utilities there. What is involved in that process? I doubt it's about calling the water company and having them bring water out there to some rural location. So when you buy undeveloped land, you need to think about how's the electricity getting there? How's the water getting there? Is there an access road? Is there a driveway? Concrete is so expensive, y'all. Like I said, I built that one house and I was like, I'm good. I don't ever have to do this ever again. Uh, okay. So you plan to be there long term. Um, what I see from a lot of Americans is because it's so ingrained in us to buy, even when somebody is moving from one US state to another, their first thought is to buy, even if they may not be there but a couple of years. And in the US, the rule of thumb is if you're not going to be there 7 years, it doesn't make sense to buy a property. But if you see yourself being there long term, buying quite possibly will make more sense. Let's see what other questions. Do you prefer furnished or non-furnished apartments? I really wanted a furnished apartment. I had a furnished apartment in China. I had a furnished apartment in Kuwait. I had a furnished apartment in Honduras. I love furnished apartments because it doesn't take me anything to set up home when I get there. I just got to bring my suitcases. And if I decide to leave, I don't have to go through the whole decluttering process of figuring out like what I'm going to do with this refrigerator I bought. So, that was my preference when I came back to Mexico City, in 2020. However, the looking at furnished apartments here, uh, one, it was the price point. Two, it was how were they furnished? We were in the midst of a pandemic. There was quite the possibility that we would be locked down and I would be stuck in my apartment. And I didn't want to be in an apartment with furniture I thought was ugly. So I did the math. Like if I bought a couch, I bought a refrigerator, I bought a washer, and I bought a bed. If I bought those things, how much would that cost me? And then I compared that to the rent on furnished apartments. And as long as I stayed here for at least a year, the money, it would come out in the wash. So I have opted. Oh, my first apartment here in Mexico City was furnished. So when I left, because when I left Mexico City in 2018, basically I made the decision a week before I left. And by it being a furnished apartment, that was a whole lot easier to do than if I were to leave now. So, are there a lot of furnished single family homes to rent in Mexico City? No, Mexico City is a weird place. If you compare it to the rest of the country and you're talking about rentals, um, furnished rentals are not the majority. That's not the thing. And short-term rentals are not the thing here. Landlords, people who have property to rent out, they seem, in my experience, to kind of have a real laid back attitude about it. Like, if it get rented, it get rented. If it don't, it don't. But don't expect me to do like try and cut you a deal because you only want to rent for 3 or 6 months. They're like, no, either you rent it for a year unfurnished or you don't. I don't really care. That's been my experience. And I'm speaking only about my experience. Let's see, what other questions did y'all have? The beds are small, the furniture is dark, the couches are small and hard, very hard. Yeah. This is not a country that comfort when people design furniture here, comfort is not at the top of that list, and that's a big shift coming from, and I will tell you, that was also the case in China. Comfort, I had some of the least comfortable furniture I have ever had to endure in my life. Um, in the US, we have a mattress and a box spring. In China, the mattress is the box spring. That's the mattress you sleep on. Uh, Comfort is not a big deal. And I think about like when we're shopping for furniture in the US, it's like, oh, I want to sink into this. I want it to be pillowy soft. That was not the experience here, and that was not the experience in China. Not even close. I do not miss the bed I had in China. Let's see what other comments. All right, Angie has had enough of home ownership, had a house go underwater before. Again, this idea that property will always increase in value is not always true. Um, been a landlord, inherited a house, had enough of all of that. Yeah. So if your new life abroad is about finding ease, you really need to think about what does that look like when it comes to housing? And just because you did it somewhere else, does that make sense for you to do it um, in in a new country? Valerina, I do not know the question to this, but I think it is an excellent question because there may be differences about inheriting residential versus commercial. There may also be different tax rules about that. So, again, this is why we want to spend a lot of time doing our due diligence. Okay. All right. I think I think that's the last of your questions. Hold on, let me go back through here one more time. Ba-ba-ba-bum. And something we've not even talked about is insurance. Um, being here in 2017 and seeing the damage from the earthquake, like I was already in Texas. I'm used to people making claims for flood insurance, damage due to hurricanes, like, oh, did the rain come in your house from the ground up? Well, that's not covered in your regular homeowners and policy. But if the roof blew off and the rain came in that way, it is. So I already know like insurance companies don't be trying to pay you. And so when I'm telling y'all, this earthquake cured me of any idea of buying property here. I thought about, okay, so what if I had bought in one of these buildings that sustained damage during this earthquake? Is there earthquake insurance here like there is in California? I know in California, most people don't have earthquake insurance because it is so cost prohibitive. And then, like, these people who would make claims, are they actually getting paid here? So that's something else to think about and be part of your research as if you're considering buying abroad is about like how does insurance work for property, for real estate? Okay. We don't have any desire to own now that we are living abroad. We like the idea of leaving whenever, or if we decide to leave, we want the freedom to live in multiple places in our retirement. Absolutely. Somebody, somebody said, like, there's a change in government and you got to get out. Um, It's a lot easier to do that when your money's not tied up in a property. That's definitely like if I'm gonna buy property somewhere, I need to see a long history of fairly stable government. If it's a place that has a coup every 10 years like clockwork, I'm talking about you, Thailand, um, I might be hesitant. Also, Thailand, I don't believe foreigners can buy or either foreigners can't buy without a Thai person on the title, or you can buy the place, but you don't get the land. You just get the inside of the apartment. So yeah, that's definitely something um, I would consider. Do you think it's better to rent first, get your residency citizenship, than if you feel more secure buy? I think absolutely rent first. But I do understand people who want to use the purchase of a property as a way to get a second passport or get a residency. But I would say, all of my advice about understanding the market, spending time there, that all still applies. And that then may make the timeline to moving into that new country uh, longer. But absolutely, um, I do think that that's worth doing. Okay. All right. One more check to see. Um, okay, Queen P. This is another one. Folks need to consider how the climate crisis is going to affect their chosen locations because it will affect everywhere. Absolutely. And I know for a lot of us, we've been hearing about global warming for so long, but I don't know if y'all looked around. Climate change is here now. Sea levels are rising now. So I that is something like one of the countries I am considering residency is a country that is very, very low lying. And kind of the thing that's keeping me on the fence is what is this place going to look like in 5 years? Given the acceleration we've seen in climate change over like the last 2, 3 years, what is this place going to look like in 5 years? I need to do some more digging on that because that country might be underwater. Can't live there. Um, has Mexico City fully recovered from the earthquake? It depends on how you define that. There are still places in the city where you can see signs that say this building was damaged in the earthquake of September 19, 2017. Um, there are also buildings in this city where they covered up the cracks, slapped on a new coat of paint, and just carried on like it was nothing different. So I don't know. I don't know. Do you ever fully recover when you live in an area that is seismically active? Do you ever really fully recover? I don't know. Buying a trailer, putting it on land, that is going to depend. I've seen people ask that question about places here in Mexico, and it depends. Um, I think as a general thing, rural areas tend to have fewer rules and restrictions, but it's really going to depend on a country. I would imagine that there are some European countries that there may be a whole lot more rules about what you can do on a rural piece of land versus what you can't than there are, let's say, in Central and South America. Um, okay. I think we did, y'all. I think we did it. Okay. So, thank y'all for hanging out with me. If you found this useful, you enjoyed it, hit the like button, share this video with somebody you know who's wrestling with this do I buy, do I rent thing when they move abroad. I'm trying to think things I should be telling y'all about. Um, Reclaim the Retreat is in February. We are getting very close to announcing the location for the retreat in April. And all I can say right now is I think some of you are going to be like, oh my gosh, I have to participate in that. Um, so right now, and if you're watching this and you're like, what retreats is she talking about? Remember, I said at the beginning of this video that basically my job is to help Black women live their dream lives. And some of us need a little bit more help than others figuring out what that dream life can be, what it can look like. And so I partnered with Ivana Robinson, who is a life and leadership coach, and we host Reclaim the Retreat. It is a place where you can reclaim yourself, you can reclaim your peace, your happiness, all that good stuff. We host retreats in El Salvador. We have one coming up in November that I think is sold out. I think it is. We're doing a special Valentine's Day edition in February, and we have several locations for 2024. If you want to know about those, go to the website reclaimtheretreat.com. There is also a place where you can get on the wait list so that you'll be the first to know when registration opens for the other retreats, when we release the destination for our April retreat, all of that good stuff. There's also a link in the description. I mentioned this before. I interviewed two women on this channel. If you have specific interest in buying property, either something already built or just raw property in Mexico, I talked to two women. The links to those interviews are in the description of this video. Um, if you want to get on the mailing list, so that you know when the Get Started Investing Challenge opens back up, and Financial Confidence Academy, all of those things, there's a link to the mailing list in the description of this video. Okay, I think that is it. Thank y'all for joining me tonight. Remember, next Wednesday, we will be on at 7 p.m. Eastern. I think y'all are going to enjoy that. So I'll talk to y'all later. Bye, guys.